we have it. 38 years and 309 days, the minimum term of this life imprisonment.
OK, well, Mark White is here with us to tell us more. Mark, we just heard the sentence.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting listening to the trial judge there when he's talking through the sentencing options that are available to him. It almost seems very mechanical and quite cold and detached, but it's an important part of open justice where, for the public, it's explained to them why he's reaching the sentencing decisions that he has. And effectively, what he has reached a decision on is a sentence that will be the best part of 39 years behind bars before this man, Marcus Monzo, can be considered for release. Doesn't mean that at that point he will be released, but he can at least be considered for parole at that point. And you heard the judge there really outlining this very, very traumatic and harrowing case that unfolded in Hainault in North East London on the 30th of April last year. And hopefully we can bring you some images of Marcus Monzo on that day where, first of all, he was posing with his samurai sword with his cat that he later went on to kill and to skin. Just absolutely horrific. But the judge saying, of course, that he was psychotic at the time through very heavy cannabis use. And this is in Hainault during that 20-minute rampage when the police arrived. Police officers attacked as well. One of those officers who was attacked was PC Yasmin Metcham-Whitfield, who pushed forward to try to arrest this man because she was armed with a taser, unlike other officers. That will, without doubt, lead to, I'm sure, calls again within the Police Federation to have tasers routinely available to all those officers who want to carry them just for this kind of eventuality. It was interesting listening to a victim impact statement from PC Metcham-Whitfield. She said, "I find this emotionally devastating. Every morning as I try to cover the scar and dent on the left side of my head, I no longer want to travel by myself, to go out of the house without someone being with me. I have a fear of being attacked again and not being able to defend myself." And you remember the judge there just stipulating the injuries she suffered, that a blow to the head that was so severe that it didn't just cause a deep laceration on her head, it also caused a compact fracture of her skull, as well as a very significant injury to her arm and to her hand as well. We've been hearing from her inspector, Inspector Malloy Campbell, who was rushing to the scene to offer assistance as well. And he has told the media of the messages that he was getting over the police radio as they're racing to the scene. And he's hearing about PC Mitcham-Whitfield being severely injured. Just listen to what the inspector says.
As we were heading to the incident, my sergeant was driving and I was in the operator's seat, and as we heard that transmission, police officer stabbed, I think I turned to him and said, "Just get us there. Don't speed up, don't let red mist get to you. We need to get there and get control of this incident." And that's the only thing. You need to switch back into the basics of being a police officer on the ground, which is the preservation of life, and that's it. And so that's the only thing I was thinking of, the need to preserve life, and that includes the police officers on the ground.
And one of the calculations that Inspector Campbell was making was the fact that there was no armed police officers on scene, nor would they reach the scene for another 10 to 15 minutes. So he really had to decide what would be their next step. This is what he told the media.
And so, yeah, it was just a case of doing what I thought needed to be done. It was a decision. Do we contain the defendant or do we confront? And that was a decision that needed to be made quickly. And obviously the decision was to confront, because I felt that had we done anything else, then more members of the public and potentially police officers would have been seriously injured or worse.
So a very brave man, along with fellow officers who confronted this samurai sword-wielding attacker. We also heard some really emotional victim impact statements from Dr. Ebenezer Ajuran, the father of Daniel Ajuran, the 14-year-old boy who was killed by this man. He spoke of running out when he was told by Daniel's brother that he'd been stabbed, to find his son slumped over on the roadway. He said when he approached him, he realised that he was dead, that there was nothing he could do for him except just cradle him in his hands, in his arms, as he waited for the paramedics to arrive.
Absolutely horrific. So there, that sentence, minimum of 40 years. Thank you very much indeed, Mark White, for bringing us that. Do you want to save a boatload of cash this summer, wherever you have a trip planned? The one thing you're going to need is access to the internet and on the go. And you can do that easily with Saily. Hit the link in the description to get 15% off your first eSIM plan ready for your trip, so you can browse to your heart's content. Saily gets you a local SIM card you can use when traveling, so you don't have to pay those crazy roaming fees just to send a message or check the latest news. Now, they've got plans in over 160 countries, 8 regions, so pretty much everywhere, wherever you're going, they'll be able to make sure you're connected. So how does it work? All you've got to do is this. Hit the link in the description to download the app. It will work on iOS or Android. Buy a plan. You can choose an amount of data and time frame that suits you best. And then just install the eSIM on your phone. When you land at your holiday destination, you can activate your plan instantly. And if that wasn't enough, Saily eSIMs only ever have to be installed once. So when you go on your next trip, you just buy a plan for a new country, turn that eSIM back on, and boom, you're back watching me on GV News. I'll be using a Saily SIM on my next holiday because it's actually faster than some of the hotel Wi-Fis. You can get unlimited data if you want, so you can scroll away to your heart's content. And when you leave the hotel, you don't have to do that annoying thing of Wi-Fi hopping because you've got constant connectivity wherever you go. And they've got 24/7 support as well, and a full refund policy if your eSIM isn't compatible. So get sorted for your next trip. Download Saily using the link in the description below. And if you use the code NEWS at checkout, you'll get an exclusive 15% discount on us. So click the link, download Saily, and use the code NEWS at checkout.
We have been listening to the sentencing of Marcus Monzo, the attacker in the Hainault attack last year that took the lives of, well, in particular, one little boy.
Yes, indeed. Let's cross live outside the court because there is due to be a statement. We're just watching here outside the court of the Old Bailey where this attacker sentenced. We could be hearing from the family. We may also hear from others too. Mark, these sorts of things, it takes a little moment or two, doesn't it, for this for a conference like this to begin. But a very long sentence has been passed.
Yeah, I mean, these are always very emotional moments for the family and actually for the investigating officers and prosecutors who put a case like this together as well, because it has been, you know, a great deal of time and emotion invested in trying to get a successful prosecution like this. And for the families, it goes without saying just how absolutely horrific and traumatic it was for them. We heard from Dr. Ebenezer Ajuran, the father of Daniel Ajuran, who was murdered by Marcus Monzo, about the gaping hole that this has left in their family, the fact that they will never get to see this amazing young man grow up and become the amazing adult that he was destined to be, never see him get married or have children. He was such an academically talented young man, we're told, who played the violin and who played the piano. He was really, according to all those who knew him, the most amazing character, who was dressed in his sports kit that day as he was going off for an ordinary day at school, expecting to be playing sport alongside his mates at school as well, when he was just, you know, approached and attacked so absolutely horrifically by Marcus Monzo. Marcus Monzo, who was psychotic at that point, having taken cannabis, very heavy doses of cannabis over a long period of time. And actually, Daniel Duran wasn't Marcus Monzo's first victim. It was another man, Donata Iwuli, who was there at the time. He's a delivery driver who was in that crescent, in that residential street, when Marcus Monzo, driving his van, drove into him, knocked him over, sent him flying actually off his feet and into a nearby garden. And then Marcus Monzo rushed from the van with the samurai sword in his hand and lashed out, striking Mr. Iwuli on the neck, causing him severe injuries to his neck. He had the wherewithal, having been knocked off his feet and badly injured because of that, and also, of course, then having been attacked with this samurai sword, still managed to sprint away for all his life was worth. And managed to get away from the clutches of Marcus Monzo.
Now, Mark, I should say we're seeing some activity here. I must warn everyone watching and listening that some viewers may find this content distressing. That is, of course, in relation to this most horrific attack. Might have been a false alarm right there. To remind everyone, we are awaiting a press conference here from the family affected, but also perhaps the police.
These things can take a bit of time, because what always happens after a sentence is passed, you've got family members in particular that will be very emotional, will be absorbing the sentence that has just been passed and what that means for the person who is responsible for such a horrific set of crimes. And they, along with the police and the prosecutors, will be, I'm sure, just amending their words, that they're going to say. What we're told is that the family will not be taking any questions from the media there. That doesn't mean the police or the prosecutors might not take a question or two if it's thrown at them by the assembled press. But what you have there, you don't see it, are many members of the media cameras, a bank of cameras, stills cameras and television cameras, and members of the press behind a little barrier there to just allow them, just at the bottom of the frame where our strap is where all the microphones are to capture the words. And we don't know at this stage whether it'll actually be the police that read out the words of the family, or whether, you know, a family member or a victim decide to come and say some words. Understandably, it can be just all too much, and the last thing they want to do is have to face the cameras as well. So they'll quite often stand beside the police and the prosecutors as they deliver their speeches and read out a statement on behalf.
This crime is just so horrific, like something out of a horror movie. A 20-minute rampage with a samurai sword, quiet suburban area, nearly decapitated this 14-year-old boy, who, as you say, has been described as a lovely boy, clever, smart, talented musically, I'm sure many other things too, a perfect little boy to his family. And he also attacked 2 police officers, 3 members of the public as well, and while doing so completely high on drugs and God knows what else.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible that it lasted as long as it did, 20 minutes, but he was running, you know, throughout the street there, throughout this residential, I don't know if it was a cul-de-sac, but certainly a small crescent, I think, of houses there, running in and out of gardens, down lanes. He went in to one house, ran into the bedroom where, you know, a mother and father were still at that point in their bed, and, you know, attacked him. He had lashed out at one of the victims, the woman in that bedroom, but actually her husband reached out, grabbed the samurai sword as it came down, and suffered a very significant injury to his hand. And at that point, there was a young child in the room who started crying, and apparently Marcus Monzo, for whatever reason, stopped his attack and left the bedroom at that point, went downstairs, and the police were arriving at that point, and it's there that they were giving chase to him. In particular, PC, Yasmin Metcham Whitfield. She was the only officer of the first cohort of officers that arrived that had a taser. So she pursued Marcus Monzo down some lanes and through sort of garages, and it was down one of those lanes. She chased after him. He was hiding behind a building and then jumped out and attacked her, smashing her over the head, as I said before, causing such injury that it fractured her skull as well as causing a deep laceration to her head, also a deep laceration to her arm that could have actually been fatal in terms of the blood loss, a deep wound to her hand as well. So absolutely horrific. And it was one of her colleagues that stood in front of her, and at that point Marcus Monzo ran away again as more officers were arriving at the scene.
I mean, what bravery of those two first officers, one who didn't even have a taser, one who did, running towards the man with the samurai sword.
Terrifying.
Only to be hacked and hacked again. And then for the second police officer to stand in between. I mean, these are the bravest of the brave.
Yes, and it was interesting to hear Inspector Malloy Campbell, the officer who was racing to get to the scene to assist his fellow officers in trying to bring this rampage to an end. He said that, you know, they didn't have time to think really about the consequences for themselves. It was all about the preservation of life. And do they try and contain it and then risk him breaking free again and injuring someone else, or do they try and confront him? And they decided to confront him, and of course that's why Inspector Campbell was injured very badly on the hand as well. He was off work for 3 months because of the injury there.
And Mark, a couple of people have got in touch asking about why it's a life sentence but with a minimum. There's a difference, isn't there, between a life sentence and a life tariff?
Yes, it's so. What could have been open to the judge had it been more than one victim, for instance, would be, and if there was no mitigating factors, would be a whole life tariff. So in other words, this man would never see freedom again. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But because there was one victim, even though he was a schoolboy, because there was some mitigating factors, such as the fact that this 37-year-old attacker had a previously clean record. He'd never been in trouble with the police before. And also, the judge said he was minded to take into account the psychotic state of this 37-year-old, even though that shouldn't be something that's used as a mitigating factor in a crime of causing wounding and attempted murder. He said he was minded to do that, but he didn't take much of the sentence. But it was just enough to ensure that it was a lengthy minimum term of what will effectively be 39 years behind bars before he's eligible to be considered for parole. As I say, the thing to remind ourselves about this, it doesn't mean that at 39 years from now that the parole board will say you are granted parole. They may well think that this is a man who's still not deserving of parole, because remember what we heard in terms of the judge's sentencing, and also what we heard from the father of Daniel Ajuran there talking in his victim impact statement. He said that Marcus Monzo had shown no remorse at all for the crimes that he had committed. Now, he may have been in a psychotic state then because of the vast amounts of cannabis and other drugs he was consuming, but one would assume that he is not in that psychotic state now. But according to Daniel Ajuran's father, he said that Dr. Ebenezer Ajuran said that this man had shown no remorse for taking away the life of his 14-year-old son in such a horrific, brutal manner.
And Marcus Monzo was a man who travelled the world trying to obtain this peculiar cocktail of drugs to feed his particularly gruesome ambition that was connected to some sort of peculiar interpretation of spirituality and religion. And he kept asking all of his victims, "Do you believe in God?" before he struck them with his sword. I mean, this stuff is just so hard to understand in terms of this man was clearly disturbed, but also, strangely, clearly he had intent because he sought those drugs in the first place that then may well have contributed to some of these mitigating factors. I mean, this was something that he had planned out as a sort of quasi-religious rampage.
Yes, and the judge said, as he was considering mitigating factors, the fact that he, had suffered psychosis because of the drugs he was taking could be seen as a small mitigating factor, but the fact that he'd sought out drugs in the first place is an aggravating factor, and he would have been aware, the judge said, about the potential effects of cannabis, the psychosis that can be caused by cannabis and a combination of other drugs, vast amounts of cannabis and the like. And I think this does ignite the debate as well around cannabis, where you have, for instance, the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, believing that, we should be going down a road of perhaps decriminalising, not necessarily legalising, but decriminalising small amounts of cannabis. Well, those in law enforcement will tell you that, small amounts of cannabis often lead to larger amounts of cannabis. Cannabis in itself can have that effect of psychosis, especially stronger and stronger sort of brands of cannabis that drug dealers are pushing out there. And they will also say that cannabis use is one of the biggest factors behind the very significant rise in violent crime in London and other centres of population in the UK, because it is the most profitable of drugs for the drug dealers. And what you will often find is much of the violence that's meted out is between rival drug gangs fighting for a share of the profits over cannabis. So it's not as simple as just thinking cannabis isn't that harmful, it's a small amount of cannabis. It can have unintended consequences and intended consequences.
Although this attacker was not on small amounts of cannabis. I mean, he, as we were discussing, travelled the world to find the most extreme, potent and peculiar forms of drugs, not just cannabis, but other opiates as well.
100%, but he never started, did he, on large amounts of cannabis? He will, like everybody else, have started on a small amount of cannabis, and his habit will have grown from then. That's the point that many who do not advocate the decriminalisation of cannabis point to. The fact that you can start out believing that you may be in control of a certain drug and that you are not going to get into a sort of habit-forming use of a drug like cannabis, but it can overtake you and you can become very dependent on certain types of drugs.
And yet clearly this happened within the structure of the system that exists in this country as things stand. The illegal drug gangs pushing that more potent cannabis. I suppose some might argue that were it a legal regulated dispensary, you wouldn't be pushed the harder stuff.
Except everybody that I speak to in law enforcement tell me that if you did that, it wouldn't actually solve the problem, because you would still have the criminal gangs trying to make a profit, and all they would do is seek tougher, more potent strains of cannabis to then sell, and they would undercut what is being sold in the dispensaries anyway. So you wouldn't really solve the problem. It would still be there. There would still be a black market that would be very popular with people who seek a greater and greater high.
Although to some extent, streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music, stay with me here, have undermined the illegal downloading music markets just because it's more convenient, because people are willing willing to pay a small fee to get the music legitimately, whereas 20 years ago they might have all been, you know, doing the illegal Pirate Bay sites and all the rest of it.
Though, is it?
But it's the same principle, that even though you can still get something that is cheaper or free or more potent or more
One
strong,
is addictive and
you're
one
going
isn't.
to go for the easy route and you're going to go for the easy option. I think there is some evidence in the United States to suggest that areas where you have more liberal regimes on this, you do see a reduction in that gang crime.
Yeah, I see different evidence when I look at the situation in the United States, and I see particular jurisdictions in the likes of LA, for instance, where they have much more liberal laws around the use of cannabis and other drugs, that actually it's not really led to a reduction. It's still suffering from a very significant problem with drugs gangs out there still fighting for their share of the market in whatever form that particular illicit substance might be. But as I say, here we go. We diverged slightly.
We certainly did.
So we are just to remind our audience waiting for a statement that we believe will either be read out on behalf of, or perhaps be read out by a family member of the victims caught up in this terrible murder and attempted murder and attack that took place on the 30th of August last year. And we will hear from those police officers from the Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, who of course put this case together, who have a lot invested in this, who will have, you know, from the point of view of both the prosecutors and the police, formed very close bonds, as they always do in these big cases, with the victims and their families. So it will be emotional for them as well. And it will be interesting to get the reaction that they have to the sentence that has been passed. A lengthy sentence, but perhaps, I'm sure for many, and maybe even the families, they're not long enough.
Yeah.
Is it ever long enough if there's any prospect of this man being released again? He'll be in his 70s at the time when he's eligible for parole.
Well, that's always the question, isn't it? When we see murderers sentenced and not given a whole life tariff, when there is that possibility that they will be able to face parole and be out before they die. Of course, he'll be an elderly gentleman at that point. So it may well be that he never sees freedom again, regardless.
To repeat, it's 38 years and 309 days. I think that makes him 76 by the time he's eligible for parole. But as you were saying, Mark, he might not necessarily be granted parole. It doesn't mean he's out in just under 39 years. It could indeed mean that he does stay there. Now, we should just recap. We are waiting for this press conference from the families who, no doubt, behind that door are steeling themselves, preparing themselves for what will be a very difficult statement to read, or indeed to have read out for them.